It begins with a disappearance that made no sense. A National Guardsman, a father, a man who rarely drifted from routine simply vanishes in early September of 2024. No phone calls. No bank activity. No messages to the people who knew him best. His vehicle still in the driveway. His belongings untouched. A missing person case with signs that something inside the home didn't align with the story being told. His wife explains that she has no idea where he is. She reports him missing. On the surface, it appears to be nothing more than a husband who walked out and never came back. But investigators notice small details that raise concern. Items in the house have been replaced. A mattress that normally would last years is suddenly new. The carpet beneath the bed has been cut out. A stain on the wall covered but not fully concealed. Subtle indications that the room had been altered. Then, in the middle of mounting uncertainty, a man contacts police with information no one expected. He reveals he has been in a relationship with the missing man's wife, Jennifer Gledhill. And he claims she told him something that left him shaken enough to immediately come forward. According to him, she confessed that her husband wasn't missing at all. She said she shot him while he slept, dragged his body out of the house and buried him in a remote area. She described cleaning the bedroom from top to bottom, removing anything that carried his blood, and replacing furniture to cover the signs of what happened. Investigators return to the home with a new perspective. What they find supports parts of the account the man has given. A newly purchased mattress. A stripped bed frame. A stain beneath where the bed once sat. Discoloration on blinds and walls that cannot be explained by ordinary wear. A room that looks fresh on the surface, yet hides traces of violence underneath. Despite the evidence, there is one element still missing: the victim. His body has not been found. The place he was taken remains unknown. Without it, detectives must assemble the picture using fragments, financial records, statements, physical evidence, and the informant's description of what Jennifer allegedly told him. The investigation now turns from a search for a missing person to the pursuit of a homicide charge. Jennifer Gledhill is arrested. The details begin to spread through the community: the marriage under strain, the secret relationship, and the timeline leading up to the night authorities believe the shooting occurred. Observers watch as her parents are taken into custody as well, accused of helping clean the house and removing items tied to the crime. With each development, the case grows more disturbing. A family divided. 3 children left without both parents. A husband whose remains have yet to be recovered. A chain of decisions that investigators say began long before the early morning when he disappeared from the outside world. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest true crime stories and in-depth investigations we bring to this channel. This documentary examines those decisions. The private frustrations building inside the marriage. The secrecy of the affair. The late-night actions described to another man. The forensic clues that remained in the bedroom. And the charges now facing the woman at the center of it all. This is the story of Jennifer Gledhill. A case shaped by hidden relationships, sudden violence, and a search for answers that continues. From the first moment he vanished to the evidence investigators uncovered inside the home, the question echoes through every piece of this story: how did a private relationship turn into a criminal investigation that stunned an entire community? Jennifer Gledhill grew up in a community not unlike many across America. Streets lined with modest homes, neighbors who wave hello, families that follow familiar rhythms of work, school, and weekend errands. Friends and acquaintances remember her as quiet, reserved, the kind of woman who blended easily into her surroundings. She didn't stand out in ways that drew attention, but those who knew her spoke of a steady presence, a mother devoted to her children and a wife trying to keep her household intact. To the casual observer, Jennifer's life appeared ordinary. A husband in the National Guard, a mother of 3, a home that looked as if it were carefully tended. Mornings spent preparing children for school, evenings quiet with homework and bedtime stories. These are the everyday details that often go unnoticed, yet they frame the backdrop of the life she led. Yet ordinary lives often conceal complexity. Jennifer's marriage, once seemingly stable, had begun to fracture. By mid-2024, the tension inside the home was escalating. Court filings show that divorce papers were in motion. Attempts to protect the children through legal means had begun, with requests for protective orders being filed and, in some instances, denied. Arguments, some neighbors recalled, had become more frequent. Conversations turned icy. Silence settled heavily in the house. Small disagreements were amplified by the weight of what was left unsaid. Those who encountered her outside the home saw a different side, a composed, polite woman at work or in social settings. Some described her as diligent and thoughtful. Yet even these glimpses could not capture the private pressures she faced, the responsibilities of motherhood, the strain of marital discord, and the emotional burden of decisions she would ultimately be forced to make alone. According to court reports and witness statements, Jennifer's life at this stage was marked by a delicate balancing act. She juggled school schedules, family obligations, and the public perception of a stable household. Underneath, there were emotional struggles, the quiet anxiety, the tension of unspoken grievances, and perhaps the growing sense of isolation that often accompanies a marriage on the brink of collapse. Then, according to allegations that surfaced during the investigation, she became entangled in a relationship outside her marriage. This secret relationship, hidden from friends, family, and community, is said to have added another layer of complexity and risk to her already fragile circumstances. It is in this context that the path from private tension to public tragedy begins to take shape. A mother, a wife, a woman known to her neighbors for her quiet demeanor, is revealed to have been living a life divided, the image of stability on one side, and a private world of secrets and emotional conflict on the other. This is the side of Jennifer Gledhill that cannot be captured in headlines alone. The friends, co-workers, and family members who described her as composed and reliable are pieces of a larger puzzle. A puzzle that shows a woman struggling under immense social pressures, personal conflict, and emotional strain. Those who spoke to investigators painted a picture of someone weighed down by the responsibilities of life, the expectations of others, and the personal decisions that no one outside her home could fully understand. It is critical to pause and consider these details. Jennifer was more than a name in a crime report. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend. She had ambitions, fears, and regrets. She was navigating a life that, from the outside, seemed ordinary but from the inside, was fraught with tension, secrecy, and emotional strain. And it is within this tension, this hidden struggle, that the events leading to the crime began to unfold. A series of choices, relationships, and concealed truths set the stage for a tragedy that would shock a community, challenge law enforcement, and leave questions that are still being answered today. As we continue, we will explore the secret relationships, the pressures, and the decisions that brought Jennifer Gledhill from a private life under strain to the center of a criminal investigation that would captivate the nation. By mid-2024, Jennifer Gledhill's life was a study in contrasts. Outwardly, her days followed the familiar rhythm of a family routine, preparing her children for school, tending to household chores, running errands, and maintaining the appearance of stability. But behind closed doors, the calm facade of family life was beginning to fracture. Divorce proceedings were underway. Arguments, once infrequent, had begun to escalate into tense confrontations. Conversations ended in silence. Long, quiet nights replaced warmth and shared plans. It was during this time of heightened stress and uncertainty that a new relationship began to take shape, one that was carefully concealed from friends, family, and neighbors. Meetings were arranged in secrecy. Text messages were sent and deleted before anyone else could see them. Conversations happened in hushed tones, often at night, and in locations far removed from prying eyes. Each encounter carried its own weight, its own unspoken risks. This was not a relationship built merely on chance or convenience. It was charged with emotional intensity, with unspoken desires, and with the complicated interplay of guilt, longing, and fear. The people involved navigated a minefield of ethical and social pressures, knowing that every choice, every whispered word, could reshape the lives of everyone connected to them. As the secret life deepened, so too did the consequences. Emotional strain began to mount. Each interaction carried a heavy cost. Feelings of betrayal, secrecy, and fear intermingled with moments of intimacy and vulnerability. Investigators later reconstructed these interactions to understand the escalation. Private meetings, late-night drives to inconspicuous locations, hurried conversations filled with tension and emotion, and messages that disappeared almost as soon as they were sent. Each moment was a small decision, a small thread contributing to a growing web of tension that had no obvious outlet. It was in these private exchanges that Jennifer reportedly shared thoughts and fears that would eventually culminate in actions no one outside her circle could have anticipated. These confessions, given in what she perceived as a safe space, reveal the psychological and emotional pressures that can build when personal dissatisfaction and secrecy collide with the responsibilities of family life. Yet, even in the midst of secrecy, ordinary life continued. Children went to school, neighbors waved from driveways, and the daily routines of the household appeared untouched. But beneath the surface, a complex and dangerous tension was growing. Every meeting, every text, every decision was a step along a path that would ultimately lead to tragedy. It is here, in this hidden world of secrecy, emotional complexity and moral ambiguity, that the story of Jennifer Gledhill takes a darker turn. A world where decisions made in the shadows, though hidden from public view, would soon come to light in the most dramatic and irreversible way imaginable. As we continue, we will trace the final steps of this secret life, exploring the moments that escalated the situation, building toward the night when everything changed. A night that would leave a family shattered, a community stunned, and a case that continues to grip public attention. As the weeks passed, the invisible strain in the household began to surface more frequently, more visibly. What had once been quiet tension became conflict that could no longer be contained behind closed doors. Arguments became more frequent, their tone sharper, and their consequences more immediate. Every interaction seemed charged, small disagreements magnified, words spoken in anger reverberating far beyond the moment. Jealousy began to shadow the household. The secrecy of hidden connections, the affair that had begun in whispers and shadows, cast long dark lines over the marriage. Fear of exposure gnawed at both the home and the mind. Every text left unread, every glance that lingered too long, every phone left on the table felt like a potential revelation. Suspicion crept in, feeding anxiety, and suspicion turned easily into confrontation. Guilt, too, became a constant companion. Actions that had seemed small and private now carried a weight that could not be ignored. In a home where children relied on stability, these moral and emotional cracks widened, producing volatile tension that neither party could easily contain. Outside pressures compounded the internal strife. Money, family obligations, and the daily grind added to the instability. Responsibilities that once seemed manageable began to feel suffocating. Decisions that might have seemed trivial now carried consequences that touched every corner of life, personal, professional, and familial. Increasingly, moments of emotional volatility became frequent. Words exchanged in anger, doors slammed with finality, the quiet despair and glances exchanged across rooms. Subtle behaviors emerged, pacing, sleepless nights, withdrawn interactions, and attempts to hide the truth from the eyes of others. Friends and neighbors may have noticed little, but within the home, the tension was palpable. These cracks in the relationship foreshadowed danger. The emotional landscape became a minefield, every argument, every secret, every small betrayal carrying the potential to ignite something far larger. It was a household on the edge, love and anger tangled together, secrecy and fear intertwined, and the boundaries between protection and peril blurred. As the days passed, the stage was set for a night in which all these pressures, jealousy, fear, guilt, secrecy, and instability, would collide in a way that none could have reversed. A household once ordinary, once calm, now stood on the brink, teetering toward an event that would shatter everything familiar and leave an indelible mark on those involved. The story of Jennifer Gledhill, once framed in the context of ordinary domestic life, now entered a phase where choices became irreversible, tensions became explosive, and the hidden cracks in her relationships became more than just emotional. They became the catalyst for a tragedy that would shock the community and command the attention of investigators. In the days before the tragedy, a series of small but telling events began to unfold, each adding layers to a growing tension that few outside the household could have perceived. Routine actions, once ordinary, began to take on a different weight. Phone calls were made and received at unusual hours. Messages sent late at night went unanswered, or were deleted shortly after being read. Each communication carried unspoken urgency and unease, small fragments of a story only fully visible in hindsight. Arguments, once intermittent, now escalated in frequency and intensity. Voices raised over minor disagreements, expressions hardened in moments that might have otherwise been ordinary. Friends and acquaintances who interacted with Jennifer noticed subtle changes: withdrawn behavior, anxious glances, a tendency to avoid certain topics. Those around her sensed unease, though few could have understood its full depth. Witness accounts reveal a pattern of strange behavior: pacing through rooms late at night, doors closed firmly behind her, objects moved or rearranged without explanation. It was the kind of behavior that can feel mundane in isolation, yet when connected with other small actions, forms a mosaic of concern and suspicion. Digital footprints hint at a complex emotional landscape. Late-night messages, location data showing movements away from the household, brief conversations with a confidant, all indicate that Jennifer was living in a heightened state of anxiety, balancing secrecy and exposure, desire and fear. Each interaction, each movement, contributed to a tension that was both emotional and psychological. In the home, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. The usual rhythms of family life were disrupted. Children's routines continued, but the emotional currents surrounding them were turbulent. The household seemed calm on the surface, yet beneath it lay a network of worry, secrecy, and unresolved conflict. Every glance exchanged between Jennifer and the other party, every hushed conversation in a quiet room, built toward a crescendo of emotion that could not be contained. The combination of secrecy, guilt, fear of exposure, and mounting pressure created a fragile environment. Each small decision in these final days, from a text sent and deleted, to an argument left unresolved, to a choice about where to go and whom to contact, was a thread in a fabric stretched taut with tension. As these final days unfolded, the stage was being set. Every small act, every moment of emotional strain, every hidden conversation, and every restless night created the conditions for a pivotal moment. The world Jennifer inhabited had become one of moral ambiguity, secrecy, and intense emotional pressure. A world in which the ordinary and the extraordinary were dangerously intertwined. It was within this fragile, pressured environment that the events leading to the ultimate tragedy were quietly, inexorably taking shape. And in the coming night, the consequences of these days, the secrets, the conflicts, and the mounting tension, would collide in a way that would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. On the night that would change everything, the home that had once seemed ordinary became the center of a crisis that no one outside could have anticipated. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence of events using statements, timelines, and physical evidence, focusing on what could be verified. The location, the family home, was quiet on the surface. Children were asleep in their rooms. The usual evening routines had concluded. And yet, beneath this calm, tensions that had been building for weeks had reached a breaking point. The private conflicts, the secrets, and the hidden pressures all converged in a single, pivotal moment. When law enforcement arrived days later, they found evidence that the household had been altered in the hours before the incident. A new mattress in the master bedroom. Discoloration on walls beneath furniture. Items moved or replaced, consistent with a cleanup effort. These changes, while subtle, confirmed that a major event had occurred in the home. Jennifer's condition, as observed by investigators and recorded in police statements, reflected a mix of emotional turbulence and confusion. She was later reported to have provided accounts of her own actions, describing decisions made in secrecy and in the heightened emotional state that had developed over weeks of tension, fear, and secrecy. The verified timeline indicates that the moment the situation turned deadly occurred within the home, late at night. The combination of private decisions, escalating conflict, and hidden pressures culminated in actions that would forever alter the lives of those involved. It is a sequence defined not by graphic detail, but by the chain of verified choices and interactions that led to tragedy. The immediate aftermath saw investigators carefully documenting the scene, cataloging evidence, and preserving the integrity of the household. Respect and dignity for all involved, including the family, were paramount in every step of the investigation. It is important to emphasize that while the actions that night were severe and consequential, the narrative here focuses on facts, timelines, and verified events. The goal is to understand how a series of choices, small and large, private and public, converged to create a moment in which lives were irrevocably changed. As the community grappled with the shock of the event, investigators continued to piece together every detail. The night that began quietly like any other, ended in a way that would prompt months of inquiry, arrests, and legal proceedings. And it is within this careful, factual reconstruction that we begin to see how weeks of hidden tension, secrecy, and strained relationships could culminate in the tragedy that captured national attention. Once the initial report of the incident reached authorities, law enforcement began a methodical reconstruction of the events. The first step was to establish a timeline. Every call, every movement, every interaction was examined with care. Investigators approached the case with professionalism, understanding that the complexity of the situation required precision, patience, and attention to detail. Forensics played a critical role. Evidence inside the home was cataloged meticulously. Items of potential relevance were documented and preserved. Subtle signs, a displaced piece of furniture, traces of fluids beneath surfaces, areas recently cleaned, became key pieces of the puzzle. Each finding was recorded, measured, and analyzed to provide clarity without sensationalizing the scene. Digital evidence added another layer of insight. Phone records, location data, and messages helped establish patterns of communication, confirming interactions and movements during the days leading up to the incident. Surveillance footage from surrounding areas provided context, showing the comings and goings around the home. Investigators cross-referenced these digital breadcrumbs with witness testimonies, looking for consistencies or contradictions. Witness accounts proved invaluable. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances provided statements that helped clarify timelines and behavior. Some observations were subtle: a car parked unusually late at night, a figure walking purposefully down a street, a brief conversation overheard. But when combined, these details painted a fuller picture of the environment in which the tragedy unfolded. Authorities approached every person of interest carefully. Questions were targeted and specific, aimed at understanding relationships, motivations, and movements rather than assigning blame prematurely. The investigative logic followed a clear principle: start with verified facts, cross-check multiple sources, and let the evidence guide conclusions. As evidence accumulated, a pattern emerged. Connections between phone records, witness accounts, surveillance, and forensic findings pointed investigators toward the individuals directly involved. Confessions, inconsistencies, and corroborated details allowed law enforcement to reconstruct the sequence of events with greater confidence. Each step brought them closer to understanding how the private tensions, secret relationships, and hidden decisions culminated in a life-altering tragedy. Throughout the process, the professionalism of law enforcement was evident. Interviews were conducted respectfully. Families were informed and supported. Evidence collection followed strict procedural guidelines to ensure accuracy and integrity. Every detail was documented to build a clear and compelling case, without sensationalizing the human cost or compromising dignity. The investigation revealed the meticulous nature of police work, how careful observation, attention to digital and physical evidence, and a methodical approach to interviews can piece together the truth from fragments, ultimately providing clarity and accountability in a case that began in secrecy and ended in tragedy. As the investigation progressed, authorities were able to identify the individuals responsible, gather sufficient evidence, and prepare the case for prosecution. But the story does not end with identification. The following chapters would explore legal proceedings, community reactions, and the aftermath that would leave a lasting impact on everyone involved. Following the conclusion of the investigation and the accumulation of corroborating evidence, authorities were able to identify the primary suspect. The arrest was executed in a controlled, professional manner, designed to ensure safety for all involved while preserving the integrity of the legal process. Law enforcement arrived at the residence, issuing commands clearly and respectfully, and the suspect was taken into custody without incident. Once in police custody, the focus shifted to interrogation, a process both rigorous and precise. Investigators sought to clarify timelines, reconcile inconsistencies in statements, and understand the sequence of events leading up to the incident. The behavior of the accused varied throughout the process. At times, there was hesitation, signs of anxiety, and moments of visible panic. At others, there was cooperation, a willingness to answer questions, though tempered by caution and careful wording. Throughout the interviews, inconsistencies began to emerge. Certain details conflicted with witness statements or with documented evidence. Investigators approached these inconsistencies methodically, presenting evidence point by point, asking the suspect to explain contradictions, and observing reactions carefully. Each exchange, each pause, and each carefully worded response was recorded to ensure accuracy and accountability. Key moments in the interrogation revealed insight into the suspect's state of mind. Statements that would later be referenced during the trial were clarified and confirmed. Investigators were careful to maintain a professional, neutral tone, avoiding leading questions or speculation, focusing instead on obtaining factual, verifiable accounts of the events. Despite the stress and gravity of the situation, the interrogation remained structured, respectful, and legally sound. Detectives relied on a combination of psychological insight, evidence presentation, and careful observation to elicit accurate statements. They noted when reactions were inconsistent, when claims could not be corroborated, and when silence spoke volumes. This phase of the investigation was critical. The suspect's words, paired with physical evidence, witness accounts, and digital records, began to form a cohesive picture of the events leading to the tragedy. The process underscored the meticulous nature of law enforcement work, where patience, precision, and adherence to procedure are essential for both justice and the protection of individual rights. By the conclusion of the interrogation, investigators had gathered detailed statements, reconciled numerous inconsistencies, and laid the groundwork for prosecution. The arrest and questioning demonstrated how evidence, careful analysis, and methodical questioning come together to provide clarity in complex, high-stakes cases, turning fragmented information into an actionable, verifiable narrative. As the case moved from investigation to the legal system, the next chapter would focus on courtroom proceedings, evidence presentation, and the path toward a formal resolution. As the investigation concluded, the case moved into the courtroom, where the law would take center stage. Charges were formally filed, detailing the sequence of actions and the resulting consequences. The legal process emphasized accountability, due process, and the careful weighing of evidence. The prosecution laid out their case systematically. Each argument focused on verified facts, connecting timelines, physical evidence, and statements to construct a coherent narrative of what had transpired. Expert witnesses provided insights into forensics, digital communications, and behavioral analysis, helping the court understand both the technical and human dimensions of the case. The defense, in turn, presented its strategy, examining gaps in evidence, questioning assumptions, and providing context to the actions of the accused. Cross-examinations were precise and procedural, highlighting the importance of legal reasoning over dramatics. Each claim, each rebuttal, and each question served to clarify details for the jury, rather than sensationalize the events. Evidence was presented methodically. Phone records, witness testimonies, forensic analysis, and documented movements were carefully reviewed. Every detail was scrutinized, every inconsistency addressed, and every fact confirmed. The focus remained on understanding the sequence of events and establishing accountability within the framework of the law. Throughout the proceedings, the emotional tone was palpable, yet restrained. Family members observed quietly, processing grief, disbelief, and hope for justice. Media coverage, while extensive, was monitored to ensure courtroom integrity. Public interest in the case remained high, yet the narrative consistently returned to verified facts, timelines, and legal interpretation rather than sensationalized depictions. After days of testimony, review of evidence, and legal argumentation, the court reached a verdict. The decision reflected the culmination of meticulous investigation, thorough legal examination, and careful consideration of human behavior and consequences. Sentencing followed, reinforcing the principle that actions carry accountability and that justice is measured through evidence and procedure, not emotion alone. The trial demonstrated how a complex, emotionally charged case could be examined and understood through law, evidence, and reasoned deliberation. It showed the interplay between investigation, legal strategy, and the careful presentation of facts, emphasizing that even the most difficult cases require structure, patience, and professionalism to reach a resolution. As the courtroom proceedings concluded, the story of Jennifer Gledhill and the events surrounding her case entered the next chapter. The aftermath, reflection, and the ongoing impact on the community, the family, and all those connected to the case. In the wake of the case, the impact rippled far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Jennifer's family faced a profound sense of loss and upheaval. Friends and loved ones struggled to reconcile the public narrative with the private reality they had known. A life interrupted, relationships fractured, and questions left unanswered. Daily routines, once familiar, were now shadowed by grief, uncertainty, and the challenge of moving forward in a world that suddenly felt smaller, quieter, and less secure. The family of the perpetrator also experienced intense scrutiny and disruption. Their lives, entwined by association with the case, were irrevocably changed. Relationships within the household, reputations within the community, and personal sense of stability were all impacted by the legal process and public awareness. Even as justice was administered, the emotional consequences remained. The broader community grappled with a mix of shock, disbelief, and a need to understand how such a tragedy could occur in a seemingly ordinary neighborhood. Conversations about safety, trust, and the fragility of relationships became common. Local institutions, social groups, and neighborhoods reflected on what had changed. A renewed awareness of the hidden pressures that can exist behind closed doors and a cautious attentiveness to the warning signs of domestic tension. The legal process did not end with the verdict. Appeals, procedural reviews, and ongoing legal discussions continued to shape the narrative. The case served as a reference point for discussions about investigation protocols, courtroom procedure, and the responsibilities of those involved in both the justice system and family life. Public documentation indicates that lessons were learned, protocols were reassessed, and systems evaluated to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Reflections from those involved, whether family, friends, or community members, underscore the complexity of human relationships and the weight of hidden emotions. Public statements reveal sorrow, regret, and a desire to move forward while honoring the experiences of those affected. Even years later, the case remains a point of reflection, a reminder of how choices, secrets, and pressures can converge with consequences that extend far beyond any single moment. Ultimately, the aftermath of the case highlights more than just the tragic events themselves. It illustrates the enduring human impact, the ways in which families, friends, and communities must adapt, heal, and rebuild. It emphasizes that while the facts of the case may be recorded in legal documents and headlines, the emotional legacy persists, shaping lives and perspectives long after the final gavel has fallen. As we reflect on the story of Jennifer Gledhill, it becomes clear that secrecy, emotional pressure, and unresolved conflict can quietly spiral into outcomes no one intends, no matter how ordinary life may appear on the surface. What began as hidden relationships, private decisions, and unspoken tensions ultimately culminated in tragedy, a stark reminder of the power and fragility of human relationships. Throughout this documentary, we have traced the life of a woman, the choices she made, and the events that unfolded around her. We have seen how ordinary pressures, domestic stress, hidden relationships, and moral dilemmas can intensify when left unaddressed. It is a story not of villains or heroes, but of human complexity, of the weight of secrets, and of the profound consequences that follow when emotional burdens remain unresolved. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of recognizing warning signs in volatile or strained relationships. Signs of tension, secrecy, or emotional instability should not be ignored. Support networks, open communication, and timely intervention can be crucial in preventing conflicts from escalating beyond control. Above all, we honor Jennifer as a human being, not just as a subject of tragedy, but as someone whose life had depth, relationships, and meaning. Her story is a cautionary tale, but also a reminder to view individuals with empathy, to understand the circumstances behind actions, and to remember the human cost of decisions made in secrecy and pressure. As this documentary concludes, take a moment to reflect on the broader lessons: the value of transparency, the importance of emotional awareness, and the responsibility we all carry in our relationships, with ourselves, with others, and with the communities around us. If this story has resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel to stay informed about true crime stories presented with respect, accuracy, and thoughtful reflection. Your engagement helps us continue telling stories that matter, honoring the lives behind the headlines, and exploring the human complexities at the heart of each case. Thank you for joining us in exploring the story of Jennifer Gledhill, a story of secrecy, choice, and consequence. May it serve as a reminder to cherish honesty, awareness, and empathy in our own lives.